Hello and welcome to the Story Behind the Stories, your weekly look at the pages of the Neepawa Banner Press. Thank you very much for taking a little bit of your time and spending it here with us on NAC TV. I'm Eoin Devereux, journalist with the Banner Press, welcoming you to this week's edition of the program. And I'm joined this week by journalist Casper Wehrhahn. Casper, good to have you here this week.
Good to be here once again, and I have to say, after another busy week, a particularly busy week, I might add, especially with the long weekend, with the holiday being on Monday, good to have another paper done and be able to go through it on the show with you.
What I found kind of interesting this week, Casper, was yes, we did have the long weekend, the Victoria Day long weekend, and we had Monday off. That's one less production day. We're able to chase down stories and actually put together pages. But for some reason, everything just really flew together this week. And come Tuesday morning, it was like Tetris. Everything slid into place for the most part, relatively easily on that day.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, yeah, we certainly had some things where we were like, okay, where can we put this? And we're like going through the pages on the table there and figuring out, okay, we can put this here, we can put that there. Okay, we're good. It all sort of just worked out, but we had a lot to get into this paper for sure.
Even to that degree, because there were one or two little items that we did end up having to pull. I'm going to share with you one of them. We had a photo and a cut line just talking about the paving, the road work that has been done for First Avenue and Mountain Avenue, essentially, just heading down towards Park Lake. That's been completely paved. We ended up having to pull that picture and that cut line. Just there was another item that came in, and it's going to be appearing much more expansively in the next edition of the Banner Press and the Story Behind the Stories about Katie Martin, a local artist who was a member and a recipient of the Women of Distinction Awards, which recently occurred in Brandon. I was trying to chase that interview down. Unfortunately, it didn't come in until after really we had to go to print for this week's edition, but we still had photo and cut line in there, and that's the reality of a newspaper. This week we only had enough for 16 pages, and in those 16 pages you only have a certain amount of space. So there are times difficult choices that have to be made. So looking at a street was removed, and looking at a local artist who was honored went in there. And like I said, we'll focus on that a little more in a future edition, because there's so many things that we can focus on this week's edition, including the front page, as always, because it's just such an interesting and intriguing little feature story that we were able to get. And Casper, you were able to wrangle this one about a local family's pilgrimage to the Far East.
Yeah, Murray Black and his son, Tom Black, happened to, go on a quite important trip for the pair of them to Hong Kong, to a few different sites in that country, with very significant importance to them. Murray's father served in World War II. He was just 17 at the time of enlistment because he lied about his age, which wasn't an uncommon thing, actually. And he ended up being held as a prisoner of war after, of course, being in combat on the front lines, being captured in 1942. So he was in a few different sites in Hong Kong, but then China as well. And actually, toward the end there, got shipped off to Japan, where he served from 1943, I think January, until the end of the war. So quite a lengthy time in each location there. But yeah, they went out there. Tom, I didn't get to fit all this in the story because it's a long story, and I wanted to keep as much as possible as I could in of all the important details, but there's just some difficult decisions I had to make. But Tom does work with Air Canada, so he'd started flying there previously, and they talked about it for a while. Tom's even flown to Hong Kong a couple times for his job, and Murray essentially told me that Tom said, "We should just go. You're not getting any younger. Mm-hmm. We should just go." And Murray was like, "Okay." And Tom was like, "Yeah, we're going on these days." They went for 4 days earlier this month, and they went to Sham Shui Po, one of the main camps. They went to North Point, and I apologize if I mispronounced this one incorrectly as well, Kowloon Island. And it was a great, very poignant experience for them by the sounds of it.
It's very intriguing because, again, we're getting obviously further and further away from that point in history. As of next year, the end of World War II will be 80 years ago. On average, an entire Canadian's lifespan in between when the war started or war ended and to the moment we're at right now. So these are the types of things that we need to remember as a nation. And it's very wonderful to see the things that we need to remember as a community and as a family, to have the family see that and want to envision it and see it through their grandfather and their father's eyes. It's an experience almost all of us can never even begin to imagine. My generation, I was raised in a generation that for the most part had peace and prosperity and good economic situations abound. I never had to deal with, as an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, or a 16-year-old, any of the stress, pressure, and strife that their grandfather had to run through. So I can't even envision it. So to see these things on the page and shared the experiences like that, I think is very important for any generation, for any individual to sort of learn from the past. So this is one of those ones that we prefer if you read every single solitary word. We prefer if you see every single solitary picture in every single paper. But if you can only do one this week, this, in my estimation, is the one you should take the time, sit down, and just go over. There are lessons that need to be learned, and there are lessons that need to be remembered, and this feels like one of those.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, and Murray says this himself, but like, you can read as much as you want about these situations and all the stuff that happened, but to have actually had to go through, of course, the war itself, but then also being held as a prisoner of war and in the conditions that it was in, because these were not great conditions. Like, these are probably some of the worst that I've heard in my research. And I don't get too deep into the details there, so it doesn't get too graphic, but I mean, yeah, it was tough. They had poor conditions. They were cared for very poorly in their capture. Didn't have much to eat. If they did have stuff to eat, it often wasn't really very edible, if it could be deemed edible. It's quite horrendous. But for that and those sorts of sites to be transformed into the memorials that they are now, and to have the new life that they have there now, as is described in the interview with Murray there, it's pretty, yeah.
Quite the harrowing lesson.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, like I said, if you are able to take the opportunity, this is one of those ones you should take the time and look at, because there are certain things generationally we all seem to be starting to take for granted. And a lot of people seem to be on one side or the other, and nobody can find a way to get in the middle. And it's wonderful that we're able to do something like that, but at the same time, we've all got to sort of understand our perspectives and the perspectives of others. And an individual like this who fought and suffered for us to be able to do these types of things, to take some of these things for granted, quite honestly. Generationally, there's a lot of generations, mine included, that take some stuff for granted. And we need to reflect on the sacrifices made. And this is a good example of doing that, learning from it, and moving forward, perhaps in a positive way. So if you want to find that, you can find it on page 1 of this week's edition. And it carries over several different pictures and whatnot onto page 15 of this week's edition. It's just a 16-page paper, again, short week. Not all our advertisers were able to get in touch with us in time, but it's still a jam-packed 16 pages of information. And so jam-packed, we're going to go into the next page. We got a couple stories on page 2 that were very interesting this week on a local level. One of them spouted up and became a thing over the long weekend, and as we speak about it now, a few days later, it's no longer a thing. But maybe it will be, but not right now, but maybe later. Who knows?
We'll see.
We'll see. And I'm talking about, there were some blockades put up over the Victoria Day long weekend down at Rotary Park in Neepawa. And those blockades in question were two giant boulders. I mean, big old boulders. If I were to estimate, they were probably about 6 feet long, probably about 3-4 feet tall, plopped right down on the road, that little loop that goes towards the bird sanctuary. If you're a local, you know, you're visualizing it in your head right now, but if you're not, you drive down to Rotary Park and there's a little loop around, and the bird sanctuary is there, and then there's the lake portion, picnic area, and then you can come back around. The parking lot is actually right at the start of that little loop. That's where you're supposed to park. I know, crazy. A parking lot where you're supposed to park? That's just insane. That's old school. What are we talking about here?
That's nonsense. We don't do that no more.
Well, the rambling I'm going into here is because of that situation, because people were choosing not to park in the parking lot. They were parking along the side of the bird sanctuary. They were parking on the grass next to the picnic area. And allegedly, I haven't seen it for myself, but I've been told by a few people, there were people that were actually parking right next to the new viewing tower that is down there by Park Lake. Now that is something very impressive. That's far enough away from the parking lot that you really got to not care about grass and flowers to go over there with your vehicle. That was impressive. And that apparently was the last straw. They decided, you know what? There's a few people that are ruining it for everybody. We got to do something about this. It's killing the grass. It's making it look really unkept. It's making it look bad. So they put the rocks down. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but it's the way they did it over the long weekend. And they said, you know what? This is a temporary solution until we can figure something out a little more permanent, maybe some barricades, maybe some signage. And obviously when something like that occurs out of nowhere, people are going to react to it. And boy, did they ever. Online response, online reactions to it were fast and furious. So the town heard those, and you know, there was discussions and whatnot, and the town earlier this week moved those boulders over. But that doesn't solve the problem that had occurred. In fact, just between you and me, we had somebody come in a couple hours after the boulders had been removed from that location, and they brought their camera in, and they had a picture on their phone, I should say, and they showed us the phone, and they said this was just down there about 40 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, and you saw an SUV parked right next to the picnic areas, right there. The thing that they were complaining about, immediately, as soon as somebody had an opportunity to do it, they were doing it again. It's like, oh my Lord. There's always one that ruins it for everybody. And I don't know who it is, but somebody is just like, you're the exception that proves the need for the rule in that sense. So with regard to Rotary Park, there is going to be a change. I don't doubt that at all. There's going to be some sort of signage. There's going to be something going on up there, because that's got to stop. And I can understand that very much from the town's perspective. But I can understand the people's perspective as well. There are some individuals, Casper, that they have mobility issues and they can't travel as good as they used to. Heck, even me. Even my knees aren't as good as they used to be quite honest with you. So traveling greater distances can be an issue, but you still want to be able to experience the wonders of nature and the beauty of our community. So it's a real give and take in my estimation.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely understand the town's frustration. I don't know if they could have gone about it a different way. Like, my initial thought maybe was like some sort of temporary sign and, like, you know, one of the standard barricades, but of course anybody could move that and they could just, move it and ignore it, sort of thing. I don't know if people would. Hopefully they wouldn't. But then that way, at least, like if sanctuary volunteers or what have you needed to use that loop around to do some sort of like delivery access sort of stuff. Like, I don't know what they have for like a food truck per se for the animals that goes up there, or any other supplies that they need to do, but they could at least move it that way.
Yeah.
But again, anybody could move a barricade like that, so who knows. And then of course I understand some, because some were a bit egregious, I think, with the online comments there in response to this, but some definitely very understandable, because again, like you mentioned, it's an accessibility issue. Not everyone can walk distance, and so for that barrier to be in place like that, it does prohibit the accessibility of that a bit. So hopefully there can be a good solution to this, and we can get people to, park where they're supposed to park, and keep everything, as it should be, well kept and just running smooth.
You know what's interesting about this as well, Casper, and this is a conversation that we had in the back there with a few other of our co-workers, was what is the definition of that road? I mean, technically the road going into Rotary Park, that's a road, that's part of the town of Neepawa, but this loop is not really a public road per se. So whose responsibility is it? Is it the town of Neepawa's? Who's responsible for the definition on that? If it's private property, does that mean that the private owners can do as they see fit and shut it down if they want? Or is it because it's for public use, that means public domain, as it were, so the rights of individuals or private property owners are negated because of the greater good? It's one of those things of how do you define that and what you can do with it? So that's probably something that's going to be coming up over the next little while as they try and figure out a solution for this. I think it's something we're going to be keeping an eye on, most definitely.
Yeah, and that is actually a good point that you bring up. I hadn't really thought of it before, and I'm kind of curious now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so you can find that story. It's on page 2 of this week's edition of the Banner Press, right next to another full story we got. It's a feature story about one of our new arrivals to the community of Neepawa, and a new veterinarian who has started working at the Neepawa Veterinary Clinic, along with Dr. Liz. We're also going to have to introduce ourselves to Dr. Marguerite. Marguerite Balaban is her name, and she has just started as of the 13th of May, the new veterinarian for the area, and it was so needed. We needed another veterinarian there, so I had an opportunity to speak with her, learn a little bit about her history, her education, what brought her and her family to Neepawa. And it was wonderful to be able to sit down and speak with this person and learn a little bit about her, about what inspired her into the profession of veterinary medicine, and just sort of her thoughts on Neepawa and moving the community, and how she's been accepted so far into the community. So hopefully you'll find that story again on page 2. It's a sort of a general overview of our new vet. So hopefully if you do have a furry 4-legged loved one or anything in between, go down there and get them taken care of, and she should be able to take care of that. All right, let's shift very quickly over to from one side of the town and community of Neepawa over to the other, from the vet clinic all the way over to Riverside Cemetery. We got a press release sent to us, and we're very appreciative of the town of Neepawa for sending us this information to share with you. They have a new digital imprint for the Riverside Cemetery mobile app plan, in which you're going to be able to sort of see some of the history, some of the locations, some of the historic moments and significant spots of our cemetery. Because that's something, Casper, that they've been working on for quite some time. There was a time when they had the forever flowers in there, and that was a big selling point for the town of Neepawa. They moved away from that. The costs were not beneficial in the long term. And they talked about we are coming up with a multi-phase, multi-year plan to work on to make Riverside a better attraction for those again. And this is part of that ongoing plan. So I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, that whole digital aspect. I don't quite understand QR codes. I'm not down with the kids on that. You know, maybe you can help me out with that.
QR codes are unique. They're useful, but I also I'm like, grr. But that's because with at least my phone, I need to download a separate app in order to scan them. So it's just one of those little nitpicky things for my specific phone. But no, with this, it sounds like it's going to be kind of interesting. I mean, they're planning on having GPS mapping and navigation so that it can, the app that is, can take you to a specific grave with a walking route, which is quite nice. Because I know sometimes when you're going to a cemetery and trying to find a specific plot, it can be a lot of walking around trying to figure out where that is. So this will hopefully be something useful to help cut down that time and allow you to get to that more directly. And then I was kind of interested personally by the memories and histories section that they talked about here, where visitors and loved ones can submit memories of the individual to the app to sort of feature it alongside their information. I thought that was quite neat.
That is very interesting as well. It's a little innovation there that I would have never thought of, but adds that little personal touch. So I think that's a very good idea. And it's very interesting to see, how and where this is going to evolve, I should say. Because this isn't just one of those things of we did it, now we'll just forget about it. No, this is an evolutionary sort of concept. So it'll be interesting to visit it again, maybe a year, maybe 2 years from now, and see what they've done to adapt and grow it for our community. All right, on that same page, we got a story here by Ken Waddell. He was able to get something together for us here. Now, everybody in Neepawa has been talking about the road conditions. Everybody has. And most recently, CAA Manitoba released their 10 worst roads, and 18th Street in Brandon was one of those roads. It was number 1, actually, on their list. If you've been to Brandon any time recently, you can definitely understand why. But it's not just Neepawa, it's not just Brandon, it's not just Winnipeg that are just over it when it comes to poor road conditions. The Burnie Highway as well is very much under scrutiny, and Ken Waddell has that story because recently the citizens of Burnie, 40 or 50 individuals, gathered together, a good portion of them, and had a public meeting at the Burnie Bridge where most of the issues with the road conditions and the poor road conditions seems to have come to a figurative head. They had the MLA for Agassiz, Jody Byram, there, discussing it with those people, seeing how it can be addressed. And I can understand their frustration, Casper. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, because this is a generational council issue, in my estimation. We haven't been putting enough into the infrastructure when it comes to the roads for the community. And that's just not on this council. It's on previous councils as well. It's just we're able to notice it this year because of the way the winter played out. And it's a lot more noticeable, but it's been an issue for an extended period of time. I understand that there's only so much money in the kitty, as it were, and you've got to put a lot of it towards water and sewer. So much has been put into water and sewer because it's necessary. And I've said this so many times. It's like we don't notice it, but if it was broken, we sure as heck would. But it's a road issue that we have. It's a road issue that Burnie has. And I hope there's a way to find some sort of simple solution to it.
Definitely, yeah. And something that was sort of mentioned in the article as well, if I recall, is that it doesn't have any sort of like seasonal use conditions. So in addition to normal traffic, there is trucking traffic, of course, trucks hauling this and that and other stuff through those roads as well, which, I mean, those roads that the semis have to travel on, they do take quite the beating. and we don't have a photo of it here on the page, but there was one photo that Rob had sent us in regards to this, showing a little bit of the damage, as it were. And yeah, it was pretty rough. And I think in my memory, the one time I had to go up to Bernie there for something, to cover something, I did go over that bridge, and it wasn't quite to that degree, but it was pretty rough that year as well. So I can only imagine how it is currently, and I hope it can get fixed fairly soon, because you need to have good roads, and hopefully some sort of arrangement can come about to help improve conditions going forward.
Well, let's shift attention then from something a little prettier than a giant hole in the ground. We're going to talk next, as we get near the end of this week's edition of The Story Behind the Stories, on a beautiful, wonderful exhibit that's taking place over at Arts Forward. Casper, you had the opportunity to see some of these. Walk us through the significance of the art and what it means for mental wellness.
Certainly, yeah. So currently Arts Forward has a extra special exhibit at the gallery there for Mental Health Awareness Month. They brought in a particular artist for it to coincide with Mental Health Awareness Month. And the art is by Aaron Witherspoon, and the exhibit is titled Healing the Mind, A Journey to the Easel. This particular exhibit, I say it's special, of course, the highlight to mental health awareness there, because Erin herself is someone who is in recovery from an eating disorder. And so her art sort of was born from necessity. I mean, traditional journaling was just daunting. It was something that her therapist wanted her to pursue as part of her work towards recovery. So instead of writing, she got, drawing and all that. And, she was able to, alongside her therapist, find, the sort of key factors that would allow her to pursue recovery in a new way and get back towards health. And so her art in that exhibit sort of catalogs her journey to recovery and shares that with the audience.
Really appreciative that she's also sharing it with us. Based out of Brandon, she's come to the Neepawa Arts Forward Cultural Center to share some of her artwork. So we shouldn't take that for granted. So if you get an opportunity to go down there and see some of these for yourself, take the opportunity, most definitely. Very appreciative whenever an artist is able to do something like that and share it with us on such a personal level. There is so much more we could have talked about this week, but there's only so much time in the day. We could have talked about Katie Martin. We will do that in a future edition. We could have talked about the retirement of Don Walmsley. We have that story on the back page of this week's edition. And we could have given a shout out to the Neepawa Tigers varsity baseball team, who won the Zone Baseball Championships recently. But that's why you got to pick up a physical copy of the Banner Press and see it all for yourself. Always remember, physical copies of the paper are in 30 different locations, 30 different communities throughout Western Manitoba. And if you can't get a physical copy of it, always remember, every Friday morning, it goes live on our website, mywestman.ca. If you have any story suggestions or ideas for us, we always do appreciate that as well. You can call us at 476-3401 or give us an email at news@neepawabanner.com. Again, that's news@neepawabanner.com. That pretty much wraps it up for this week. Casper, you did a lot of the heavy lifting this week in terms of the stories. Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. And well, obviously, thank you for your work this week's paper as well.
Oh, yeah. And again, we thank you because you're the reason we're here. You're the reason we're in the studio. You're the reason we're in the newsroom. So we appreciate you supporting us at the Neepawa Banner Press and supporting us right here on NAC TV each and every week with the story behind the stories. Thank you. We hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again next week.